Welcome to Virtual Death Doula Network's Death Salon, talking about Memento Mori. I'm Daniel Shaw. I'm a Death Doula and the Chief Operating Officer at the Virtual Death Doula Network. And Andrea Sugar is here also, the CEO and doula. And like I mentioned before, this is going to be a little bit different than previous ones because we are going to be encouraging more active discussion between all of us today. Please know that you don't necessarily need to speak to participate. You'll be able to throw questions or comments into the chat as well. And keep your camera off if that makes you feel more comfortable, because like we said, we are recording this for putting it up on our YouTube channel when we're done. And you don't have to communicate at all if you don't want to. If you want to just sit here and listen and take it all in, that's fantastic too. Wait. Having trouble advancing the slide. There we are. Before we get started, we're going to do a little breathing exercise for 30 seconds to drop us in and get us all centered and grounded in the same space. This is alternate nostril breathing. I will guide you through it. It's pretty straightforward. To start, we're going to place our thumb on our right nostril and ring finger on the left. Don't press down on the left one though, because we're going to start off by breathing into it. Basically, we're going to breathe in and just sort of alternate pressing on one nostril and the other as we breathe in and out. We'll do a couple rounds of that and we will move on from there. So please, thumb on your
right
nostril. Yeah, thumb on your right nostril. We will get right. Inhale through your left. Pinch off your left and open the right and breathe out. Breathe back in through the right. Pinch left and now breathe out your left. In your left. Switch fingers out through your right. In through your right. Switch. Out left. In left. Switch. Out right. In right. Switch one more time. Out left. And we will leave it there. All right. Thank you all for being here today. And yeah, we're going to get right into talking about Memento Mori and what that is and how you can benefit from it. Andrea, would you like to take us?
Yeah, so Memento Mori in Latin literally means remember that you have to die. And the purpose of Memento Mori is not to carry a dark cloud or be morbid, but it's rather to compel one to lead a rich life of purpose, perspective, and deeper relationships. In other words, it's motivation to really live your biggest, best life possible, because we all do die. Some people use the symbolism Memento Mori not only as a reminder of death, but also to stop spending time dreading the future, agonizing over the past, procrastinating in the pursuit of other goals, holding grudges against others. Basically, it's a reminder to stop doing all of those things and just be present, because in the present moment is where we can live our richest life. And there's a distinction between living versus existing. And Memento Mori really reminds us to live rather than just exist. And a reminder to live. We wonder, how could I forget? But it can be so simple. We can get really caught up in what we call future tripping, when you're really thinking about the future or you're stuck in the past, rather than appreciating each moment as it comes. So that's a very brief kind of dip into Memento Mori, and we're going to return to that a little later. But one of the things that comes out of Memento Mori is having a really beautiful conversation about death. We have found that no matter what, people find talking about death uncomfortable. We have posed several questions in our Facebook group, and most people say that it just feels kind of sticky or weird. And a lot of it is cultural, or at least in our culture. talking about death is taboo. It's supposed to maybe be private or secret. And that's not the case, because it is something that every single human on this earth is going to experience. That's what we have in common. So this is our kind of open conversation. And I'd like to ask people, and you're welcome to raise your hand and we'll unmute you and you can speak, or you can type into the chat, however you're comfortable communicating, or no need to communicate at all if you don't want to. But does talking about death in this way, in thinking about death and thinking about symbols of death, does talking about death in this way make you uncomfortable or scared in any way? Oh, Gary says no. Thank you, Gary. I appreciate you sharing that. No, my Lord, not at all. It freaks other people out, and that's what we're finding. You know, as end of life doulas and death doulas, we do this all the time. So talking about death is second nature for us, but that's not so for everybody. And we are really striving as what we do to bring the conversation to a place where it is comfortable, where it is okay, where it feels softer instead of jabby or painful. Megan says no, and in my eyes, it's really no different than talking about birth, and that it's completely connected to birth. You cannot have one without the other. So what we're trying, and I love that people here are feeling like they're very comfortable talking about death, but they notice other people are uncomfortable. So what do you do then for the people that are comfortable and find themselves having conversations? Louisa is also one of our doulas. So what do you do when you reach a conversation with either a client or a friend or whomever, and you're fine talking about death and they're uncomfortable? Would anyone like to share about what they do? So while everybody's thinking about that, I want to read what Ashley wrote, because I think it's really, really pertinent. Ashley said, no, it actually brings a sense of peace. I think where the fear may come from is that if you look at death from this perspective, you're almost forced to take a lot of accountability for your life and maybe areas you need to fix. Ashley, that is amazing. That is a very insightful and thoughtful statement. Thank you. And I agree. I think that it can be scary, because then we are really responsible for how we live every moment of this life.
Right. And it's interesting, like, it's interesting to see everybody's, like, all the responses so far have been, no, we're all fine with it, which I guess sort of makes sense. I mean, you've all chosen to be here for this discussion and everything. So I imagine that we're probably a little bit skewed from the general populace as far as where we're at with death and our familiarity with it. But yeah, sort of, I'm trying to think, like, sort of the last conversation I had with, like, I was talking to my father the other day, and the conversation came up about my mom's death, and it was this sort of like this. It was sort of the first time that we had spoken about it in a while, and it was in a like public place, and it was just sort of an odd sort of area for it to come up, but it did, and I was okay with it. It was interesting because my father's not, I don't know, well, he's where he is in his journey and everything. But I was able to sort of like drop in and be present and sort of, you know, talk about my experience of her dying, and in a way that I had really had an opportunity to just before, just because of the way things have played out with us. And I could, you know, he's still, you know, he's not as comfortable with it as I am, and that's fine, because everybody's, you know, everybody is in their own unique place on this journey with respect to what they consider, you know, how they view death in general. And, you know, again, the bulk of the people seem to not, they just, you know, choose. It's not as if that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just, you know, most people, it doesn't come to mind because they're busy, you know, living. And again, that's why we're talking about this in particular, because if we do choose to look and honor and consider our own mortality, some neat things can open up for us. So, and I kind of hijacked the floor there for a little bit. So I will turn it back over and let other people talk. Sorry.
That is okay. Thank you, Daniel, for sharing. I think that it's important because one of the things you pointed out is that you and your father obviously both experienced your mother's death, but it took you a number of years to be able to talk about it together. And I think that that's important. And, you know, a lot of that was you meeting your father where he was within his comfort and you meeting yourself in your own comfort.
Right. Because, yeah, that was 30 years ago. And this was the first time we've really had a conversation like that. So that's, I mean, well, that's just how long it took.
So going back to the concept of Memento Mori, one of the things we're curious about is how do you feel about this concept? Some people have expressed that it kind of freaks them out, that some of the symbolisms, skulls, hourglasses, dead flowers, things like that, feel kind of creepy to them almost, as opposed to a reminder, a gentle reminder to go and live. So I'm curious, how do people feel about this concept? And again, feel free to raise your hand and we will unmute you, or you can just start talking, or you can type into the chat. But how does this feel as a way to talk about death? And if anyone needs any technical help, don't be afraid to raise your hand. If you don't know how to unmute yourself, we will do that for you. Gary says it feels healthy and empowering. Thank you, Gary. I appreciate that. Out of curiosity, are you an end-of-life doula? What brought you here? And you're welcome to unmute yourself and speak, or you can keep typing into the chat. But I'm just very curious what perspective you're coming from.
Hi there. No, I'm not a doula, but I do work with doulas. I'm creating an agency, so
Excellent.
that's my interest.
Well,
Sorry, I apologize, doing a little technical help. So Gary said that it feels empowering. Louisa said, thinking of all the old artwork of Memento Mori, it really looks as if the culture at that time was far more admitting and open of death. Perhaps some social media ID photos should be more Memento Mori. And I can't agree more. And, you know, I have to wonder if maybe way back a long time ago, death was so much more common. I mean, you know, people died all the time. We didn't have the medical care. We didn't have all of the options. And so people got sick and they died. And I think people were a lot more connected to that.
yeah, they were exposed to it. It wasn't like it's, you know, in the culture now, it's become more common for folks to, you know, go into retirement homes and stuff, sort of as they get near that end of life, and especially potentially winding up in a hospital, depending upon if they have terminal illness and stuff like that. It's sort of, in past times, death was very much part of the community and a community event. It's sort of been removed from that to a certain extent, not entirely, but that has happened, particularly in Western cultures.
And Gabby said, I've always loved hourglasses and skulls and have a growing collection of both. And it's making more and more sense now why I've always been attracted to these symbols. That's fantastic, Gabby. And those are two of the main symbols for Memento Mori. Jackie says, personally, I like it, but I understand others who are depressed or suicidal may view it in a different way. I have also heard of Memento Vivere, meaning remember that you must live. I think it essentially means the same thing, but for someone who would like to eventually become a therapist and possibly a death doula, I'm struggling as to how helpful the term is to those who are in the dark night of the soul. Thanks for having this conversation. So that is incredibly important. And this is something we work with all the time. In fact, it's something that Daniel and I really talked about a lot in even doing the death salon surrounding Memento Mori, because we are aware that sometimes some of the symbols can be kind of freaky to people. Sometimes this kind of conversation can feel ominous, but that is a big part of what we do, is changing that narrative so that it's not ominous, so that thinking about death in order to enrich your life is not morbid. We are all going to die. It's a fact. So it's not bad. It's not something bad that's going to happen. It is a beautiful part of the life cycle. I think you'll find, Jackie, as we get into this, we actually do talk about Memento Vivere essentially in a little bit of a different way. And I think that that's a really nice way to frame it as well if you feel like somebody might be too tender to dive all the way into Memento Mori. So what would make it easier for you or for your clients or for your friends, family members, loved ones, the people that you've spoken to, the people that feel uncomfortable, or you, what would make it feel easier to engage in this, in conversations about death, in our own mortality, whether it's about Memento Mori or just in general? Well, for me,
Okay.
one of the things that made it easier for me to engage in it was to kind of just jump right in and not be so afraid of the emotions that might come up when I talk about death. Gary says stories from others to act as a conversation starter. That's a fantastic way to get people to engage. Connecting our lives with the cycles of life and death in nature. Having some kind of framework to make meaning of death feels helpful, especially a transpersonal framework, such as the Buddhist concept of bardo. And then I'm gonna just go ahead and unmute everyone. So if you want to speak, please feel free.
Hey, Ashley here. I'm not really sure if this would make conversation easier, or maybe it would land with somebody who would think more from a logical perspective compared to an emotional. But I actually I don't remember if it was the last Death Salon, if it was the one before, um, where they were talking about kind of like end of life planning, or like what are some of the things that happen when, like, if you were to die suddenly and you don't have any access to your loved one's bank accounts and all the different things that can happen that you may not have access to. And I actually, I don't remember how we started this conversation with my grandma, but she's like, yeah, like my grandma. So my mom is scared to talk about death with my grandmother. And she's like, I don't understand why. Like, I'm gonna die. It's gonna happen. And I proposed, like, well, I don't know if she understands what can happen after you die if you don't have like these particular things set up, and how much harder it would be for her afterwards, on top of already having to deal with her emotional grieving. And she was like, oh my God, it's actually like a really good point. Maybe you should start bringing that up to her as like a conversation starter, like, hey, do you have this planned? So my thoughts are a little bit scattered right now, but yeah, I'm not sure if that would make it easier, but I think maybe something like that would also be a good conversation starter, just to kind of,
Daniel?
Yeah, thank you so much. Absolutely. And also, I guess I'm just, and to get back on some of the other stuff that's popped up, Melor mentions talking about speaking from a first person perspective, which is absolutely, like, that's something I'd like to do also. That does help when you're not sure how to talk to somebody, to just sort of, put things in I statements and talk about our own relationship with death and what we've experienced as means of sort of bringing it out. And yeah, Jackie talks about, breaking the icebreakers. Like that's some of the earlier comments also sort of touch on that. It's sort of like, how do you sort of get into it? And it's, if you're just waiting for the conversation to happen, it might not, which is, just because it's, how often does something like that come up in everyday conversation? So how do you do an icebreaker? You need to be, certainly have some intentionality behind it. Perhaps if you do want to have that sort of conversation, yes, sense of humor is fantastic. I just realized I'd forgotten that I had this. I've got a Memento Mori deck of cards with basically conversations. Like, this is a deck of icebreakers essentially that you can go into. If and obviously that would be, if you were pulling this out, you probably had an idea ahead of time to sort of have a specific conversation and everything.
And the deck that Daniel is talking about is called the Death Deck. And it's a neat thing. It's a great way to kind of break the ice with death. It has questions that are multiple choice. It has questions that dig a little deeper. And there are a whole range of like, what would you wear to, a clown's funeral? And then it has really serious questions. It's a tool that I've used with clients and had phenomenal results. I had a client whose family had a very hard time talking about her death, and I managed to get all of them into her room, and we played for about an hour and a half, and it spawned some beautiful conversations and enabled a connection within the family that hadn't been there before.
Yeah.
So people
And
do
actually,
strange sometimes when you say humor or a game with death, but it does actually exist. And we will include a link to the death deck in our follow-up resource email.
right. And actually there's two different versions. This is actually Morbid Curiosity, which is basically the same thing. And there's Death Deck also, and they're two near, same concept, same, different questions, different stuff on the cards, but they're otherwise pretty identical. And yeah, we'll put links into those because they're pretty cool.
Actually, we'll make sure we have links to both of those.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think that you can buy them directly from the vendor, which is something we prefer to support if possible.
Yes, absolutely.
So thank you. Is there anything else anybody would like to add to this conversation or ask or anything before we move on to a little bit more in-depth conversation about the benefits and practices of Memento Mori?
All right, I'm going to move us on then. We'll have a chance for Q&A later still anyway, so.
Yeah, after we do this part, we will have our normal Q&A. So anything you have, if you want to put it in the chat so you don't forget it, feel free.
So yes, thank you all for that nice discussion to get us going. And so now looking more specifically at Memento Mori and some of the benefits that come from actively considering the fact that we're going to die, can give us perspective. Everything that's physical is transient and temporary, and as a result, that's sort of just a reminder that no matter what happens, like, whatever happens, we will be we will be okay ultimately, and sort of recognizing that in the grand scheme of things, we are here for whatever our reason is that we're here, and we can make the most of our life with the knowledge that it is limited, and the fact that it isn't going to go on forever sort of adds, like, that's sort of the point. The fact that we are going to eventually pass away enables us to have better appreciation for the time that we do have here. It can provide motivation. Some of you may remember the movie Dead Poet Society from a while back. Near the start of that, the instructor, played by Robin Williams, gives a lecture where he introduces Carpe Diem, seize the day. And that is, like, in the process of doing that, and he brings the students and shows them pictures of older students and focuses on the fact that they are basically, the same, with the exception that those ones that they're looking at behind the glass are all dead now. And, had they taken up the opportunity while they were alive to do everything that they wanted to do. And so, and with the focus in his case being Carpe Diem, to seize the day, but that really is sort of like two sides of the same coin when it comes from Memento Mori, because he was very much using the concept of the fact that they are all dead and that all the students that he was talking to will be dead, as a means of saying, make the most of the time you've got now. Gratitude, of course, knowing that I'm going to die, everyone that I know will eventually die, everything that exists in the physical is going to pass eventually, makes us more appreciative while it's here if we take the time to consider it. Reflection, like, sort of like, it gives you an opportunity to sort of like see where you're at with your life. Like, do you have a bucket list? And if you do, are the way you live, are you living your life in a way that's helping you achieve those bucket list items? And if not, what can you do differently to help reach that? And if not, if you don't have a bucket list, like sort of that is a way of practicing memento mori potentially, if you're able to write down stuff that you do want to do with the time that you have before you die. And so going from those benefits, how do we actually get some of those benefits, like the practices? Like I sort of went into it a little bit, like a bucket list is a very practical practice that you can use to sort of help you keep focused on stuff that you would like to accomplish before you die. Creating an altar. Altars are fantastic. Andrea, do you want to?
Yeah, do you want to do
Sure.
mindfulness first and then I'll go into the altar?
Well, oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, mindfulness. It's sort of, yeah, mindfulness is I love mindfulness just because it is a tool that enables so many more things. And by mindfulness, what I'm talking about that is just being able to be present and being aware of being present and not just automatically reacting to what's going on around you, but being able to intentionally take in everything that's going on around you and make a decision about what you want to do next, instead of just automatically, again, reacting to what might be going on around you. And when you're able to get into that present moment in a mindful way, that enables you to do all the things that we're talking about, as far as, reflect on what am I doing right now, and is it in line with how I want to live in order to make sure that I get the most out of the time that I have here. Mindfulness enables us to be grateful for what's happening while it's happening. Mindfulness enables us to have perspective on the fact that whatever I might be doing, whatever I might be looking at, is transient and going to end at some point. And so any sort of mindfulness practice in general is beneficial, not just for Memento Mori, but for a whole host of other you get a lot of other benefits about it besides being able to do stuff like Memento Mori effectively.
The present moment is a moment where we usually find that if we're really in it, we are okay.
And it's all we have ultimately. I mean, all that exists is now. And if you're, and this sort of gets back to what Andrea mentioned earlier about being stuck either like future tripping or getting hung up on stuff in the past. When you're doing that, you are not in the present moment, and you're missing it. Because again, this is it. That future is not, that's in your mind. The past is all in your mind. And the only thing you have is what you got right now.
So one of the things as far as mindfulness and Memento Mori is that the awareness of death brings us the awareness of living and the awareness of how richly we can live our lives. And one of the ways that you can bring this concept into practice is to build an altar. You can create a small sacred little space. It doesn't have to be anything big. You can just find a little spot that you like, maybe put a little cloth down or a little tray, or just, clear a little spot and collect some items that remind you of Memento Mori. So again, the typical ones are skulls and hourglasses. Some of the things I really like are dried dead flowers. I think they are absolutely beautiful. You could bring in dead leaves, anything that kind of reminds you of the fragility of this life, is that reminder of, oh, look at that. Let me live to the most of my ability today, whatever that means. And if you don't want to make an altar, if that seems overwhelming or just not your style, you can find a small physical item to carry around or look at as a reminder every day. And it can be anything, anything that reminds you of this. Oh, Malor says, I have a crystal angel on my altar as Memento Mori. Beautiful. There are so many things, and it's really what's personal to you. And again, to when you look upon it, not feel this ominous dread, but to look upon it and feel good and hopeful for all of the possibilities that exist in this moment right now.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And meditation, there are specifically death meditations, and Andrea and I actually went back and forth a little bit on whether or not to include one, and decided to hold off, but just to let you know that they're out there if you want to Google them, and they range from actually sort of meditating and imagining your actual passing and everything, to much less much more, I don't know, not getting as in depth to the actual dying experience, but there's a wide variety of just sort of death meditations that you can specifically look up if you want to explore that at all.
And if you do decide that, you are more than welcome to reach out and email us to ask us about it before you get into it, or if you have any questions, we are here to support you in doing things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Please reach out if you want more information on how those meditations might work and what they look like.
And then Louisa said she found a skull rosary as well as mala beads that she just loves. And I think that sounds amazing. A tiny little mala or rosary made out of skulls. I think that would be a lovely reminder. So again, you can really make this your own, and it's meant to inspire. And we hope that this discussion does that for you today. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop up and say them or stick them in the chat. So we are now at our question and answer time.
Yeah. And I'm gonna turn off the slides for a bit because we can just chat and bring them back up when we want to wrap up, but I want to see your faces. I've been staring at slides too.
No worries if you do not have your video on, there is no pressure to turn your video on.
Right. Yeah, I said yes. Only if you want to show me your face.
So is there anyone that has anything that they're feeling unsure about, or maybe feeling a little weird about, anything at all, or feeling amazing about coming out of this conversation? Everyone's feeling pretty good. We always want to check in because we have found that, like I said, sometimes the concept of Memento Mori can feel really heavy to people when in fact it can actually be quite joyful. I think it just kind of goes to show the juxtaposition that we have of these opposites that are totally connected and you can't get out of them: life and death, joy and pain. These things are all connected. But even in the things that are hard or possibly sad, we can find moments of joy. And in fact, I want to encourage that. I don't like to should people, but I would highly encourage it, to find joy wherever you can, even within the dying process. All right, well, if nobody else has anything they would like to say, that is okay. We will go ahead and kind of start wrapping things up and move back to our last slide. We have some exciting things to announce.
Yep, doing that now.
So Memento Mori is a mindfulness enabled life enhancing tool. It's really about life, even more than death, because it's reminding us that we are alive right now and to take full advantage of that. You will receive a follow-up email with the resources we mentioned and a YouTube link within the next few days. We're very excited to offer a new service. It's a dementia coaching support. A lot of people don't know that dementia is a terminal disease, and it can be very challenging, not only for the person with the diagnosis, but with the family. My father had dementia for a very long time, and it was very difficult. So this service offers a lot of support for the family in how to navigate the changes that your loved one is going through and how to move with them to best support yourselves and them. So there's more information about that on our website. If you have any questions, please feel free to let us know. And as always, donations. You guys keep us running with your donations. You enable us to see clients that would not be able to have the kind of care that we offer or the support that we offer. There's several ways that you can donate. They're on our website. You can donate via PayPal, via Venmo. We have a fundraiser running through Instagram right now, as well as several ways to donate on our Facebook page. And again, we are grateful. Every single bit helps.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. We would not be here without you.
Okay. Thank you, Gary. Liz has something that said, not sure if this is the space to bring this up. And it is. as I acknowledge that it's a highly sensitive topic, but I'm curious how you would navigate the process of grieving a loved one's suicide and how to talk about it. That is really hard. And as far as grieving, everybody grieves differently. So my suggestion would be to grieve openly and to talk openly about it. Again, suicide is one of those taboo subjects that people are sort of afraid if they talk about it, it might get on them or something. And that is not the case. And I have a background in suicide research. And in my opinion, the best thing you can do is to talk about it and to know that you can't control what happened. It's not your fault and you're not responsible. And so finding ways to honor your loved one and to talk about it so that it's not so stigmatized, so that you can continue to go on loving them. That would be my suggestion. And if you have anything more to say, please feel free to put it in the chat or email us.
Right, and I'm going to throw out some chat stuff now, some links for some of the stuff that we've been talking about. There's the dementia support, the new service that we're excited to offer now. Our other newish service is spiritual coaching to help discuss topics just like this. Yes, somebody else's. Jackie's, will you be talking about your perspective on Memento Mori and how you approach those with depression or even death anxiety on the other side of the spectrum, or will this be included in the resources email? Well, we can discuss
that now.
Yeah.
And before we do that, Megan asks if this is a monthly occurrence. Yes, this absolutely is a monthly occurrence, except for an errant month here or there. If you sign up for our newsletter, then you will always know that this is happening. You can also select to sign up to be regularly signed up for this, and then you'll just receive an email with the Zoom link the day before the salon. I do want to touch on what Jackie brought up about talking to people with depression or death anxiety. We actually do a lot of death anxiety support. That's one of the services we offer.
That was the one I just put out there. Good timing.
So the way that we tend to approach this is openly and honestly. You know, we meet the person where they are at, so we find out where that is. And we also, depending, for us, there's a client and we feel like their depression is beyond the scope of talking to a doula. We always will help connect them with a therapist or other help so that we can work in conjunction. We have several clients that we work as a team with their therapy team and us. But I think that's a wonderful idea to focus on memento vivere if it feels a little too touchy to say memento mori. They're two sides of the same coin. And so I would say that talking about it gently, acknowledging it, and then just reminding people that it's common and it doesn't have to be so scary, or finding out why it's scary. We found that there are some people that are very afraid of death because one example was someone who did not have a spiritual practice, which was fine, but they were really afraid of what they called the void surrounding death. So we met with them and spoke with them to kind of find some comfortable spaces for them to explore that. Is that helpful, Jackie, or did that answer for you?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I apologize, I wasn't speaking before because my environment was very noisy, so I wouldn't be able to hear me anyway. But I appreciate that, just because I feel like just listening to this, I feel like Memento Mori and also Memento Vivere kind of are almost like, they seem opposite, but they almost are kind of like the same thing. Like, I guess similarly to people who are adverse to Memento Mori because either they have depression and they're like, maybe even welcoming death, or, they have, very intense death anxiety, it's almost, two sides of the spectrum, but it's almost kind of the same thing. They're just very adverse to it. So I kind of was just curious to kind of maybe move towards Memento Vivere type thing. Like, I mean, I'm very into Memento Mori personally. Like, I was gonna get like a necklace. I was, I got posters. So that's something I'm interested in. So which is what drew me to the conversation. But I guess someone who is looking to eventually, counsel people professionally, or just even become a death doula. Like, I'm just very much learning about this stuff. But I guess, yeah, just curious about your perspectives and your experiences of it, kind of working in more of a, I guess, professional field, if that makes sense.
I guess again and again, and sort of the reason we had this kind of conversational death salon is because death positivity. You know, people find it hard to talk about death all the time because they feel scared or they feel like it's bad. There's so much judgment surrounding death, when death really isn't good or bad. It just is. It merely is a fact of life. And
Right.
it sounds a little harsh to say that, but that's the truth. And so what we just encourage is open conversations about death, and doing it in some people need little chunks. We talk about it for 15, 20 minutes. They need to take a break. You know, some people, we're able to give them some things to work on, some journal prompts, some practices or activities, and then have them check in with us to see how they feel. And we, you know, we'll offer breathing exercises to go along with this. So if somebody starts to feel a little bit unsteady, they have a tool to fall back on. And again, just that death isn't bad, and that it is okay to talk about it, and that talking about death doesn't mean that you want to die. It doesn't mean that you're morbid. It just means you're having a conversation.
Right. No, that totally makes sense. And I appreciate you holding space too. And I think, like you said, it's just more important just to kind of hold those spaces where, you know, the conversation can be had, whether it's someone kind of exploring their, you know, relationship to it and just kind of saying, oh, okay, maybe I don't have to look at it that way. But I just want to mention really quick, when you mentioned the void of death, kind of like just going into the void and that's it. That was actually something I had to get over, because coming from a Catholic upbringing, I was just like, oh, like you just die and then you live forever. And I'm like, oh God, like that sounds terrible. So it's kind of funny. But that was my void. I was like, oh, I'm gonna be stuck with all these people in church. Like that's my void. Like this is it. Like, oh geez. So
But what a great thing to talk about. Thank you for sharing that with us. I mean, it just goes to show you that there's a vast number of conversations that can be had about death, and that they don't have to be scary. It just can be open.
Right. And the fact that we're all here having this conversation is fantastic, because this is, you know, we are putting this sort of death positivity energy out, and all of us are more open to having these conversations with other people now as a direct result of us being here and having this one now, which is fantastic. So like from that perspective, thank you all so much. I know we're not wrapping up, but like I just tons of gratitude for everybody being here today and engaging like this.
Yes. And again, thank you all so much for coming. Daniel put links to the services for our stuff in the chat. They will also be in the resource list, and we will get that out to you within the next week. Thank you all again for your time, and we hope to see you next month.